so moving on, we have terrain, right? So this is a shot from Breath of the Wild, the new Zelda game. And this is actually a screenshot of the interactive map that you can see when you pull up the menu, one of the menus inside of Breath of the Wild. So this is a whole interactive map of the terrain. So again, this is an industry example. This isn't something you're making. Don't freak out and panic like, oh my God, I have to make all this terrain. We're just talking about some industry examples and how we can apply them to our own work. All right, so this is the terrain. Here is the link to that map. I will include that in the video down below as well. That way you can actually check it out. And this map is actually created by IGN. It's an interactive map that you can showcase all of the collectibles and all of the interactions and all of the important pieces and locations in the game. But we can use it to analyze and look at the overall terrain and how the terrain is portrayed and communicated. Right? This is 3D objects or 3D detail portrayed in 2 dimensions, which we want to take a look at. So now in closer detail, here's a small snippet of that terrain. We can take a look at how they're using the colors and the lines to communicate height. Right? So first and foremost, the color, you'll see down here the darker colors, the darker shades of brown, represent the lowest points on the map. And the lighter colors, you'll see the white or the very, very light brown, represents the highest points. Right? And then it blends and transitions between the two. All right, the lines, right? This is referred to as a topographical map, right? And this game took it to that level of detail in the extreme of what you'd see on a traditional, realistic top-down topographical map. So where you'll see the thickness in the lines and the overall distance between the lines represents slope, right? So when the lines are further apart, like down here, this means a shorter gradient, right? The slope is shorter or lower, so that's the overall transition in height. When they're closer together, that's a sharper gradient or a sharper slope value and much steeper, much more of an incline. So you don't have to go to this level of detail. You'll see if you look closely at the image, you'll see there's the lines running through, and then there's these slightly bold lines looks like every 5 lines or so. That's the level of detail that you can shoot for within your own map. But this is a great example of a current game, right? A very current game that has using the detail of a topographical map as their terrain. All right, so another way just to portray that, right? This is what we're looking at in 2 dimensions, right? Here's a small sample of that. And this is what it will look like in the 3D perspective, right? So this is that same top point of that mountain right there, and then you can overall see how it will translate into 3D. So again, the more detail that you put into this, the more planning that you put into your map now is going to make your life so much easier when you get into level design. All right, so now let's take a look at some student examples of terrain and how you can use terrain in your own map, right? So here you'll see this is using the polyline tool, right? There's 2 tools that you can utilize when creating terrain inside of Unity, or sorry, not inside of Unity, inside of Google Draw, where you'll be creating your map, and that's the polyline tool, and then the second will be the curve. But here you can see that same concept, right, of there's the lines between the overall changing in colors, right, in that height, as well as he's using the terrain in a great way to form the player's path and block off to make sure the player can't see or get out of world at any point. Right? When I'm down here in this section, if I look south, right, there's going to be this blockade and barrier in my way. Right? So keep that in mind. The terrain is great for surrounding your level and encompassing the whole level to make sure the player can't get out of world. So the polyline, which we're looking at here, you'll see that it's a much more jagged and rigid angles that you're getting, right? You can create points, and every point will just be a linear line to the next point that you draw, right? So once the shape is created, then you can change the color, you can change the line thickness, you have some adjustments you can make to the overall shape. You're pretty much just making a custom shape and as well as duplicating them and changing colors to portray height. So whatever colors you're using on your map, feel free to include it on the legend inside of the icons, specifying what the different colors mean. If the dark brown means it's walkable, and then this medium brown here means that this isn't walkable, or specify which each color is representing. So if you want the light colors to be the high points or the dark colors to be the high points, it doesn't matter. Just specify what it is inside the legend. Alright, so next here's an example of another piece of terrain using the curve tool. Alright, so it's important to note that everybody has to include terrain in their map in some way. That's a requirement in level design, that everybody includes terrain in their level. That way they can evaluate you on how well you can use that tool. So if you were planning on making an interior level, right, it takes place inside of a building or a warehouse, that's okay. You can still use terrain on the inside as well as to surround the entire building. So here is a great example of one using the curve tool. You'll see more of an organic line being passed through here, right? Very smooth, and you can still edit the points and manipulate them after the fact. But very different looking than the angular lines that are created from the polyline tool. So this is showcasing it using the curve tool, as well as here's a great example of terrain used on the interior. So we have our pathway here that the player can walk, and the terrain is great at forming large barricades and forming obstacles that the player needs to get around, or that just naturally form that player path that we want them to take. So here this can be anything from sand or dirt, debris, any piles of garbage or junk can be represented well with terrain. So feel free to utilize that on the interior and the exterior of your map. Alright, so like I said, both tools will allow you to edit the shape after it has been created. You can do this by either right-clicking on the shape and select Edit Points, and you'll see here in the image it will pop up to where you'll have these different points that you can move and update the shape. You can't delete them or add any points. If you're trying to do that, you're better off just redrawing it itself. Alright, Google Draw is limiting. It's not the level of detail we get in Photoshop per se, but we do have a lot of control, and there is a lot that we can do to make our work very presentable right inside this tool. So you can either right click and hit edit points, or just double click right on the shape and the points will come up and you can click and drag to move them to different locations. Alright, so think about using terrain in your level. Again, it is required. Don't just tack it on to the side of your level or at the starting point. If you're building a level that's interior, right, most of your gameplay takes place inside of a building of some kind. Still think about when you're transitioning, when you're going from your previous teammate's area into your area, or you're leaving your area and going into the next area, eventually they're going to have to exit that building. They're going to have to walk outside, or there's going to be a cutscene, or something is going to transition them physically to the next location. So it's a really good idea to have your terrain surround and encompass the entire building. So that way as well, if you want to have like windows, here's an example, here's a window, right? So if we're looking out the window, what are we going to see? You can use the terrain to create an entire environment that your play space exists within. So think about it using terrain that way, and using the colors to show gradient and height.